If you have never entered the world of Port William, I just cannot even begin to tell you how much you are missing. These are the most beautiful stories, and I promise you, when you read one of these books, it will alter your life in some way. They are that good. When I read them, they're so beautifully written, it just makes me want to cry. These stories about Port William are told by Wendell Berry. He is the author. And if somebody asked me today who my favorite living author is, I am pretty sure that he would be at the top of the list. I have a couple of favorite authors, but he would definitely be right up there. So Port William is a community, a rural community in Kentucky, and the stories all take place around the time of the Depression, or actually even earlier than that. I know some of them are in actually the 19 teens and really up until 2000, but they're all told from the perspective of the different members of the community. So different people in the community have their own story to tell. This month, I kind of immersed myself into the world of Port William, into the world of Wendell Berry. And the first book that I read was Jayber Crow. And I actually read this book, 25 years ago, and loved it then and kept it and said, I'm going to read this again one day. And I finally got to it. Jayber Crow was a member of Port William, and he was the town barber and gravedigger. He was actually born in 1914. That's why I know that the stories start before the Depression. And he was orphaned at a very young age and raised by his aunt and uncle, who were very, very loving. After they passed away, he had to leave the community, and eventually, though, in his adult years, made his way back to Port William and became a part of that community again. As the town barber, he was right there in the heart of things. He remained a bachelor and lived above the barber shop, but constantly, that barber shop was the hub. It's where the men came to hang out. And so he was always just in the thick of everything. He knew all the stuff. He would quietly cut people's hair, or a lot of people would come in just to sit and hang out. I guess that's how it was at barber shops in the day. But he grew close to the men of that community and knew them well. In the Port William stories, they talk about membership. You are a member of the Port William community. In fact, if you see the subtitle, it says The Life Story of Jayber Crow, Barber, of the Port William Membership, as written by himself. And membership, that's such a key in these Port Williams books, because you are not just a resident of the community, because that just kind of implies that's where you live. Or you're not just a citizen of the community, you are a member of that community, meaning if you choose to be, you are a vital part of that group of people. You depend on each other, you love each other, you're there for each other. If you are a member of a church, you certainly understand this concept that you are members of each other. In fact, in the Bible, it talks about how our hands and our fingers, and we refer to our fingers and our toes and things as members of our body. They're not separate. They're all part of one complete whole. And that is a major theme that runs through these stories. Another one of the books that I read was the story of Hannah Coulter. And she actually talks a whole lot more about this concept of membership. And I want to read to you as part of this, just to give you the way she actually talks about this. This was our membership. Burley called it that. He loved to call it that. Andy Catlett, remembering Burley, still calls it that, and I do. This membership had an economic purpose and it had an economic result, but the purpose and the result were a lot more than economic. The others of us received no pay. The work was freely given in exchange for work freely given. There was no bookkeeping, no accounting, no settling up. What you owed was considered paid when you had done what needed doing. Every account was paid in full by the understanding that when we were needed, we would go, and when we had the need of others, or enough of them, would come. In the long, anxious work of the tobacco harvest, none of us considered that we were finished until everybody was finished. In his old age, Burley liked to count up the number of farms he had worked on in his life and never took a cent of money. The membership included the dead. Andy Catlin imagines it going back and back and back beyond the time when all the names are forgotten. The members, I guess you could say, are born into it. They stay in it by choosing to stay, and they die in it, or they leave it, as my children have done. Hannah Coulter is a beautiful story of a young woman beginning in her around the time she was 12, and she grows up and finds her way to Port William and marries into the Port William community. And this is just an incredible love story about a couple who begin their lives together when they're young, and it ends when they are senior adults and when he eventually passes away. And it's just about their love for each other and them going through the good times together and the tough times together. And they had some tough times. And as her husband often said, he said, "We're just going to keep on living." I love this one part where even as he is dying, he says, and he's dying of cancer and she wants him to be treated. But he says, "Dear Hannah, I am going to live right on. Dying is none of my business. Dying will take care of itself." As I've said in previous books, it's hard to say what the plot of these books are because they're just about life. And I find that I enjoy those kinds of books very much when it's just about the living of people's lives and the themes that run through them. Here again, the theme of membership, the theme of friendship, of belonging to each other, the theme of being connected to the land. That's a big one in these books. Just again, so beautiful. And I will say they are the kinds of books you don't want to just kind of on your lunch break, flip through it. No, these are meant to be just absorbed. I say you have enough summertime left. If you can find one, sit down on your back porch or your deck or whatever and just enjoy living in the place of Port William for just a little while. So there are, I believe, 8 Port William novels and dozens of short stories. I have not read them all, but I was interested to read as I got into this month that there is another Wendell Berry novel coming out in October of this year, 2025. It is the story of Andy Catlett as he is telling actually the story of his grandfather, and he's telling the story to his children and to his grandchildren. Now, the Port William novels are not all there is to Wendell Berry. He also writes poetry and he writes essays. This month, I also read this book. And this is not written by Wendell Berry, but a book about Wendell Berry. It's called Wendell Berry and the Given Life. And this is by Reagan Sutterfield. And this is a book, it has a biographical element to it, but it is not completely a biography. I did learn some things. I learned that, one thing I learned is that Wendell Berry studied under Wallace Stegner at Stanford. And that was really interesting to me because I love Wallace Stegner also. In fact, one of my very first videos, Crossing to Safety, was written by Wallace Stegner. And many of Wendell Berry's peers who they all studied together under him or have become, prize winners and have just become very well-known authors and very highly respected authors. But this book is not really a biography, but the author kind of takes different chapters and shares about Wendell Berry's perspectives on different things. For example, there's a chapter on humility, and there's a chapter on love and on work and on Sabbath and on membership. And he draws from Wendell Berry's essays and from his Port William novels and from his poetry and shares about Wendell Berry's perspectives on these different themes. And this book is just, It is worth reading. There is so much wisdom between the covers of this book. If you are a Wendell Berry fan and you have never read this book, it's one you might want to check out. Well, so I, again, had read Port Williams books, but I am not a huge poetry reader. So I wanted to challenge myself to read some poetry. I would rather read novels, but I did read this book. It's called The Selected Poems of Wendell Berry. And, you know, there were some really good thought-provoking ones in here. But again, I struggle with poetry. I don't know how else to say that. Some of the poems, he has these poems, they're called his Sabbath poems. And Sabbath was a very important concept for him. And so he would write poetry on Sundays, but if it came to him, if it didn't, that was fine. He would get out and walk, and these are just the poems that came to his mind as he would be out walking. And if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. So he has his Sabbath poems. He has his, I think they were called window poems, the poems that he would write as he sat and looked out his window, and whatever inspired him, he wrote about. But there's one poem that just really resonated with me and that touched me that I'll share with you. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. It says, "When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free." And I love that, because how easy is it to think about the future and to think about what if, what's going to happen? How do you escape from that? And he says he goes into the nature and he realizes nature doesn't worry about what is to come. We just live. And going back to Hannah Coulter, I think of Art Rowan Berry, another one who went off to war and came home and never left again willingly. And I quote him to myself, "Something better. Everybody is always talking about something better. The important thing is to feel good and be proud of what you got. Don't matter if it ain't nothing but a log pen." But those thoughts come to me in the night, those thoughts of becoming sick or helpless, of the nursing home, of lingering death. I gnaw again on the old bones of the fear of what is to come, and grieve with a sisterly grief over Grandmam and Mrs. Feltner and the other old women who have gone before. Finally, as a gift, as a mercy, I remember to pray, "Thy will be done." And then again, I am free and can go to sleep. The humanity that is in Wendell Berry's writing just touches, I guess that's what it is. It just touches me so deeply. And I realize so much of what he writes about, we've lost in our lives. And so the challenge is to think about how to recapture some of that, how to recapture the sense of membership, the sense of community that we share with people, how to recapture our connectedness with the earth. His books are about humility and about just accepting life as a gift, accepting each other as gifts, and not taking that for granted. So I mentioned that he also has essays, and I have 3 books of his essays. There's Citizenship Papers, and one called Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community, and The Hidden Wound. And I began reading The Hidden Wound. I wanted to read some of his essays, and it did not happen. But perhaps I did start The Hidden Wound, and this is a book about our nation's history with racism. And he actually begins, he says, "It occurs to me that for a man whose life from the beginning has been conditioned by the lives of Black people, I've had surprisingly little to say about them in my other writings. Perhaps this is justifiable. There is certainly no requirement that a writer deal with any particular subject, and yet it has been an avoidance." And he goes on to say that, if as long as he is unwilling to address the history of racism in his own family and in his own life, and to address it as a societal problem that, he can never hope for anything better for his grandchildren or great-grandchildren, that he has to address it. So that is what that is about. But I have not read that book, and I haven't read any of those essays, but I will say that maybe one of those will sit on my nightstand, because I know that if I could just read a little bit of Wendell Berry every single day, I would be a better person. I know I would be. Well, I appreciate you sharing this time with me and hearing me talk about one of my favorite authors. When I began making YouTube videos, I set out to make a video once a week. And as you know, if you've followed me at all, you know that that didn't happen over the last month. But while I may not post a video every single week, I am back, and I have some great books in my stack that I am looking forward to sharing with you. So if you would like to follow along and hear about what I'm reading, and maybe jump in and make comments and share some of the favorite books that you're reading, I would love that. Just if you want to subscribe, or just watch for future videos. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful end to your summer, and find some great end of the summer readings. If it's not Wendell Berry, find something that you can just really relax with as these days begin to get busy again with back to school activities. But again, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Bye.